All right, so today we got an economist on the CBC bashing Mark Carney and the premiers on their political theater. We also have an update to our debt management, and this is stats coming from Canada, a strategic plan that they put out, as well as we're going to be checking on kind of what's going on with Pierre Poilievre and some of the things revolving around him. So without further ado, let's get into it. So yesterday we had all the premiers meeting in Muskoka for their annual Council of Federation, and they actually invited Indigenous leaders to this meeting so that they can kind of be a part of it. However, Mark Carney was not there. He will be joining the premiers today and kind of giving them a rundown on what's been really going on behind the scenes in regards to conversations between the federal government and the U.S. government. As we all know, this August 1st deadline is kind of looming, and they might be talking about what's going to happen if they can't even meet the August 1st deadline, or if they are even close, or what's really going on. However, the Treasury Secretary for Trump yesterday came out and said they're not really too, I guess, preoccupied with the timeline as much as they are with the quality of the deals that are going to be coming out of this whole tariff situation. Take a look.
Mr. Secretary, August 1st is a week from Friday, I think, and I think that's on everyone's mind. Any progress that you can report on some of our big trading partners?
Look, Joe. Talks are moving along, but the important thing here is the quality of the deal, not the timing of the deals. And President Trump has created maximum leverage, as only he can do. And what we are seeing is like these imbalances built up over 20, 30, 40 years. And we are more concerned with high quality deals than getting these deals done by August 1st. Our trading partners were told that the rates could boomerang back toward the April 2nd levels. We can continue talking then, but again, we're proceeding apace with the negotiations, but we're not going to rush for the sake of doing deals.
Now, this to me makes a lot of sense, seeing as Trump continuously changes the dates of all these deadlines over and over again. So come August 1st, even if they don't have a deal, he might just push it along in order to get what he wants. And as we all know, supply management is a large one. However, Premier Legault came out yesterday saying, well, supply management is pretty protected. It's off the table.
For us in Quebec, there's no question about negotiating the supply management for dairy and other products. Also, it's important to protect our cultural exemption, like French on tags and everything.
Now, I know I've been beating on this supply management drum for the past few videos, but it's going to be a major factor, I feel like, in these negotiations. Trump's made it very clear over and over again. Howard Lutnick has talked about it. Even this economist that the CBC brought on mentions that we should be looking at potentially renegotiating or using this as a tool for our negotiations.
I think there are other things we should be talking about that could have a real impact on the discussions. But ultimately, this comes down to what are Canadians willing to concede in order to get a deal with the United States. That could be supply management. It could be softwood lumber here in BC. It could be measures to do with steel or aluminum or the auto sector. But those are like the key areas where we're concerned.
Now, the funny thing is the CBC actually brought this economist on to talk about what's going on in Muskoka with the premiers and when the prime minister arrives, to talk about interprovincial trade, a lot of these memorandas being signed, and he just rips into them saying, like, this is all political theater. They're just doing this to kind of save face, basically, and that it's really not going to be worth in any of our time or do any benefit to the economy.
So today's Premier's meeting is expected to see the signing of more of these memorandums of understanding between provinces. There have been, Ontario has signed a number with some provinces to eliminate these interprovincial trade barriers. Would this actually make a difference to the Canadian economy?
Well, in short, no. The reason is that goods, services, and investments already flow freely across Canada. That was something that was built into the Canadian Constitution in 1867. In the context of international trade agreements, it's been reaffirmed with interprovincial trade deals in 1995 called the Agreement on Internal Trade, and in 2017, the Canadian Free Trade Agreement. So the Canadian Free Trade Agreement, if you read the language of it, it does what the premiers say they're promising to do right now. So I think a lot of this is just political theater. Obviously, the premiers and the prime minister are looking to respond to the Trump tariff threats, but they should be focusing more on those big macro international trade policies, some of the stuff that was just discussed in terms of retaliatory tariffs or other measures that we could be taking. There's very, very little to be gained from this conversation on internal trade barriers, but it makes the provinces look good. They can wrap themselves in the flag and say that they're responding to the Trump tariff threats.
Well, Mark, it's interesting you say this, and maybe it is political theater, but, when you listen to the Prime Minister and others, but the Prime Minister has said that if these interprovincial trade barriers are removed and there is more free trade within the country, that it could grow the Canadian economy by $250 billion. So you say that's bogus?
Yeah, I mean, I've had conversations with the author of that study. It's mostly Trevor Toome, coming from the University of Calgary. It's it's an economic modeling exercise that assumes that there are large trade barriers that exist largely due to differences in regulation between provinces. So differences in environmental protection or consumer protection, health and safety for workers. Trevor himself would admit that to the extent you can resolve these, you may not be able to capture all of that. It's a long-term gain. We're looking at gains that would happen 10, 20 years down the road, and even that $200 billion is the top end of a very large range. So I think there's not a whole lot to be gained here. The media keeps trotting out this idea that there are large interprovincial trade barriers and keeps throwing out that $200 billion number. It's not helpful to the public debate. It's a distraction relative to the big things. We should be focusing more on things like federal public service cuts that are coming. That's going to have a massive macroeconomic impact across the country that will completely dwarf any potential gains from these trade barriers.
I gotta say, seeing the CBC host here, Andrew, go on and say, "Oh, the Prime Minister said that if we got rid of these interprovincial trades, our economy would be booming." Are you saying that this is bogus? And the economist Mark, he's just like, well, he's citing a report done by Trevor Toome, and even Trevor Toome would say that this is just a model. And I found that interesting that Mark Carney is referencing a report from Trevor Toome, because if you remember during the campaign, Mark Carney actually said, well, he was a better economist than Trevor Toome.
So Trevor Toome is wrong, in your opinion? Yes. I have more experience than he does, and it's important to state that.
Barry with CBC. I'd like to follow up on that. Just if you've got an economist like Trevor Toome saying that your plan is unsustainable, is just that. Is there an argument that if Pierre Poilievre is trying to bring down spending, bring down the deficit, that his plan is more fiscally responsible than yours?
Yeah, so very interesting that he's referencing Trevor Toome when he's apparently the better economist than him. But going on to the next story, the Department of Finance of Canada dropped this 2025-2026 debt management strategy, and it is not looking good in this report. If we scroll down, it says the planned borrowing activities for 2025-2026. The projected sources and uses of borrowing for 2025-2026 are presented in Table 1, which we will take a look at in a second. The comparison of the actual sources and the uses of borrowing against projections will be reported in the debt management report. Now, this is just the debt management strategy. They haven't done the report yet, as they state that this document will be released soon after the Public Accounts of Canada 2026, which will provide detailed accounting information on the government's interest-bearing debt. And it is not looking good, because when they talk about what their uses of the borrowing are going to be, total borrowings include $612 billion in Canadian currency and $11 billion in foreign currency. These borrowings will be used to refinance $471 billion of maturing domestic debt and $5 billion in foreign currency debt. Now, if you just take the 471 from the $612 billion, That is 77% essentially of that whole borrowing simply going to the debt. But they also say it will also be used to fund projected financial requirements of 147 billion. If you add the 147 to the 471, it's actually more than the 612. You get the 618. So the government is going to be borrowing even more than originally at the 612 mark. And when we come down here, you're going to see the chart that they were talking about, table 1, planned actual sources and uses, refinancing needs. Total financial requirement is $147 billion, as it's stated here. These are the billions of dollars. And when we come down to the borrowing program, 2025-2026, borrowing needs are expected to remain elevated, primarily reflecting funding needs of maturing debt, as more than 80 billion in 5 years debt issued during the COVID-19 pandemic will mature in 2025-2026. So because of how much borrowing and spending and all that garbage they did during COVID, we are now feeling the after effects 5 years later. It then goes on to say the composition of the market. The total stock market debt is projected to reach $1.6 billion by the end of 2025-2026. You can see that here. Again, these are numbers in the billions at the end of the fiscal year. So this is just projected for next year. $1.6 billion. And again, this is just the debt management strategy. This isn't even the actual report because it hasn't been done yet. But when you see the deficits that the government's going to be running, Carney scrambling to get his ministers to do major cuts to all their departments, crown corporations asked to be cut, and even public sectors losing hundreds of thousands of jobs, you start to wonder what's really going on. And CTV actually did an interview with a radio host who kind of threw it back in the liberals' faces, saying, well, you might have a voter remorse at this point because Carney promised that he would cap the public sector, not cut it, but you were lied to. Bruce Fanjoy lied to you. And if ultimately, this is kind of what happened in regards to Pierre's riding.
After Prime Minister Mark Carney tasked his cabinet with finding savings within their departments, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre says he lost his Carleton riding in May's federal election because he was honest about wanting to cut federal jobs. He made the comments in an interview with the CBC over the weekend. Why don't we check in right now with Bill Carroll from the Morning Rush on News Talk 580 CFRA. Good Monday morning to you, Bill.
Good morning. Yeah, this could sound like Pierre Poilievre making excuses, but living in his riding, or former riding, as I do, I can tell you that that was certainly part of the talk during the election campaign, that there was a lot of fear-mongering. I don't think he used that phrase exactly, but I'm going to use that phrase because I think it's appropriate. Public sector unions were fear-mongering in that riding about Pierre Poilievre cutting federal government workers' jobs if he gets elected, which he certainly didn't deny at the time. And of course, the Liberal candidate who ultimately unseated Pierre Poilievre certainly wasn't dialing back any of that fear-mongering. And I would say, even from what I've heard of people who had them knock on his door, he was pushing that narrative as well. You elect Pierre Poilievre, you could lose your job. And where do we find ourselves today? A new government, a Liberal government, that's talking about cutting a major number of federal public sector jobs. It's the only way they can reach the goals they're talking about here and the savings they're looking for. So that local MP has a lot of explaining to do. We've invited him on this show. Want to talk to him on radio about it. I'm sure you'd probably like to talk to him on TV as well, because I think there are going to be a lot of people in the riding very disappointed by the direction the Liberals have taken. You add, Rosie, the fact that we learned on Friday that the unemployment rate across Canada, while it looked pretty good, we lost 10,000 jobs in Ottawa. We're being hit unusually hard. Normally, we're kind of sheltered from a lot of these job losses, but we've lost a lot of jobs already because of the tariff wars, and we may lose a large number of civil service jobs as well. Could be very tough on this city. So there'll be a lot of people who voted Liberal, I think, wondering why this is happening, why it wasn't something they were more prepared for. Not that Mark Carney didn't talk about keeping the civil service spending down, but he talked about capping the civil service, not cutting it. So voters' remorse? I don't know. not from me. I didn't vote for the fear mongering, but we'll see what other people feel, I guess, as time goes on here.
Now, that interview was actually from a week and a half ago, and I have yet to hear any update on whether Bruce has come onto the show or not. So that says a lot. But when we look at Pierre Poilievre, the riding whole situation, and we look at now Battle River Crowfoot for the by-election, it is now reported up to 140 candidates are registered for this ballot. This is much longer than what he was in Carleton, which I believe was a 90. So now he's at 140, and the longest ballot wanted to do, I think, 200. So they're getting pretty close. But here's a little snippet on the people in the area and how they're feeling towards this.
More than 140 candidates will be squaring off against Pierre Poilievre in next month's by-election for the federal riding of Battle River Crowfoot. While the majority are protest candidates, some believe they have a real chance. CTV's Merrick DeCash spoke with a few of them.
Running against the federal conservative machine, a tall task for independents like Bonnie Critchley.
It is very important to me that Battle River Crowfoot gets to have a voice in Parliament.
Critchley's run triggered by the resignation of the riding's former MP, Damien Currick.
When Damien asked us for a mandate, we gave him one. And then he turns around and says, I don't want that.
My wife Danielle and I decided that this was a way that we could serve our country, serve our province, and serve this region to ensure that those values are fought for by the Pierre Poilievre being back in Parliament as Leader of the Opposition.
Sarah Spanier is also an independent candidate who doesn't want to see Poilievre represent this riding.
I think it shows fear if he's coming to the easiest riding, as we are labeled. He, in my opinion, doesn't feel like he can go secure that anywhere else.
She knows it's a long shot, but she believes beating Poilievre is possible.
When we get into a conversation and they actually take the time to listen and hear what I'm saying, it has turned into signatures. So I just have to do that 100,000 times.
Now, I personally think these ladies are a little delusional. I can understand the being upset about Damien Currick after you just voted for him, assuming they voted for him. They don't really seem like the type to vote for him. But assuming they did vote for him stepping down and allowing Pierre to run in the riding so that he could get back into the House of Commons, yeah, I could see how that's a little bit frustrating. But if you did vote for Damien, you were looking for the Conservatives because they represented your values. And if you have Pierre, who's the one who has the best chance of potentially beating Carney and getting into the House of Commons or getting a Conservative government in Parliament, why would you stand in the way of that? But on the topic of Pierre, I do want to cover this this story quickly because it just came out, and it's talking about the Conservatives MPs publicly support Freedom Convoy organizers ahead of sentencing. And this is about Tamara Leach and Chris Baber, who are potentially getting 7 to 8 years in jail for mischief. And Pierre actually put out a tweet about this saying, so let's get this straight. While rampant violent offenders are released hours after their most recent charges, anti-Semitic riots vandalize businesses, terrorize daycares, and block traffic without consequences, the Crown wants 7 years prison time for a charge of mischief for Leach and Barber. How is this justice? And just the other day, we had this video coming out of Toronto or Ontario, where again, pro-Palestinian protests are just blocking the road and the cops are doing nothing.
Look at this. They blocked all the streetcars, every single direction. They're blocked. This way, this way. This way. Traffic is completely stopped.
Now, there was a few subsequent videos of individuals being arrested, but they're definitely already out. They were probably just held for a few hours, released. They're not going to be getting 7 to 8 years in jail for mischief, which is surprising because they're doing the same thing that the trucker convoy did. They're blocking major infrastructure, making a lot of loud noises, and now we have a two-tier system where it's one group's going to be getting 7 to 8 years, and the other one just getting off scot-free. But in regards to Pierre's tweet, the comment section was a little bit mixed. Derek from Unacceptable Fringe saying, thank you, Pierre, for weighing in on this. You had Real Talk Politics saying, it took you long enough. Mr. Sunshine Baby saying, okay, I like you again. Bob the fact checker also saying it took you long enough to finally say something. So again, some of the comments a little bit mixed up. But with that being said, what do you guys feel about this? Are you happy that Pierre has actually said something? Do you think that he took too long to say something? Let me know what you guys think about all this in the comment section below. Thank you all to the subscribers, the likes, the follows. I really do appreciate it. And as always, I will catch you guys on the next one. Thanks so much.